Hello and welcome back to Ultimania Final Fantasy. If you missed part 1, click the annotation to the left or the link in the description. Let's cut straight through the intro and get straight to the good stuff. Final Fantasy III is often considered the long-lost Final Fantasy game, as it was the game that took the longest to be localized in the West. Visually, it's very similar to FF1 and 2, however 3 expands on the gameplay by including the changeable job class. This was also the first game to use an auto-targeting battle system. Thank God! In the previous game, if a character was set to attack an enemy that had been killed by another party member in the same turn, the attack would be registered as ineffective. With an auto-targeting feature, the attack would automatically switch to the next target. Certain characters were also given unique attacks such as summon or throw. This was also the first game to show battle damage to the party sprites. In addition to the graphical update and battle mechanics, this was the first appearance of the now classic blue text boxes. A lot of first appearances for this one. Due to Final Fantasy III coming out towards the end of the NES and Famicom's lifecycle, Square didn't have enough manpower to work on the English version. Final Fantasy III also holds the record for the longest RPG on the NES or Famicom, raising the question as to whether or not an English translation would have even fit on the cartridge. The sheer size of the game was also the reason why the game was never ported to another system until a ground-up remake of the Nintendo DS. The story centers around 4 orphans drawn to the Crystal of Light. The orphans are granted powers by the crystals and are hence known as the Warriors of Light. The warriors say goodbye to their adoptive families and journey across the land through temples, caves, and woods in a crusade against the powerful wizard Zand, a former student of the great magus Noah, who was sent over the edge when his master gave him the gift of mortality out of fear of death. The story even involves the death and resurrection of our heroes. In regards to the characters, this marks the first time in the series where the characters are in fact children. The children include Luneth, the main character tasked with saving the world's crystals, Ark, Luneth's best friend who joins him on his journey, Raphia, a blacksmith's daughter, and Aegis, a knight of Susan. The job classes are separated into 2 groups with each character starting off as freelance. Yay, I'm an FF class! Physical orientated jobs include freelance, onion knight, warrior, monk, ranger, knight, thief, dragoon, Viking, dark knight, black belt, and ninja, while the magic-orientated jobs include white mage, black mage, red mage, scholar, geomancer, evoker, bard, devout, magus, summoner, and sage. The music of FF3 is actually some of the most reused outside of just referencing this entry. For example, the opening ending themes as well as several others appear in Chocobo Racing for the PlayStation, and the original background music for the town of Amor is the basis of the song Cloud Smiles in Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Despite the game's NES version never being released in the West, Final Fantasy III was in fact advertised along with Final Fantasy II. The NES version was not the only one to be cancelled. Along with Final Fantasy I and II, 3 was supposed to be ported to Bandai's WonderSwan Color with the release date of September 2001, but it never saw the light of day. While there was a port for Final Fantasy IV, Square remained silent on the WonderSwan FF3. Including the Famicom version, the game is available on Nintendo DS. It even has its own DS Lite model, Wii U Virtual Console, iOS, Android, PSP, Ouya, Windows Phone, and Steam. In 1990, a Game Boy game hit the shelves in North America under the name of Final Fantasy Legend. While commonly known under this name, it is in fact Maki Toshi Saga, literally translating to Hell Tower Warrior Saga. The game was rebranded under the Final Fantasy moniker to boost its sales. The story centered around a great tower at the center of the world. The tower connects to many different worlds and the entrance to paradise at the top. A group of adventurers from the base decide to climb to explore the various worlds, along the way encountering strange creatures including monsters based on the Chinese zodiac who guard the floor keys, eventually encountering the creator at the entrance to paradise. The game was released under the Final Fantasy Legend banner on Game Boy in 1990 and was later re-released in 1998. After the completion of Final Fantasy III, the team at Square had an idea for a slightly more action-based entry to the franchise, with a more dynamic action-orientated overworld rather than combat displayed on a separate screen. However, the project was deemed not for anymore and eventually released as a game you may have heard of Suiken Detsu 2 or Secret of Mana. Having to start from scratch with 4 again, the team decided they would make the ultimate Final Fantasy game, combining the story-driven aspects of FF2 and the ability to change jobs from FF3. Attempting to combine the two gave rise to what we now know as FF4. With the decision to make 4 more story-based, it limited the amount of customization the player had access to. To make up for this, a new battle system was created that we now all know as the Active Time Battle System, originally inspired, believe it or not, by Formula One racing. Wow, I need to give American football and Formula One a lot more credit. Once again created by Hiroyuki Ito, who felt that battles in the JRPGs would eventually be done in real time. Ito felt that too many action elements would alienate users, so the theme he came up with was an action action-like game without reflex action elements. One thing Ito had in mind was automatic transmission or stick-shift gear changes. Even though the process is automatic, the player or driver still has to have something to do, unless they'll get bored and their attention will shift. At the time this was going on, semi-automatic transmission were being introduced in Formula 1. From this concept, he came up with the idea of character speeds differing based on the type of character being used. With this in place, Ito felt that implementing that kind of system would give the illusion that the player was driving the actions a lot more actively, not realizing that most of the actions were in fact automatic. With a story-driven plot, the characters are even more important with FF4, boasting a larger playable roster than the previous entries with only one permanent party member. Our lead of FF4 is Cecil Harvey, initially a Dark Knight and captain of the Red Wings of Baron. Cecil begins to question his king's motives, which gradually sets off a chain of events that leads him to a path of righteousness. Joining Cecil on his quest are Kane Highwind, the commander of the Baron Dragoons and Cecil and Rose's childhood friend, Rydia, a young summoner whose village is unintentionally destroyed by Cecil and Klein under the king's orders, Kayla, an elder sage driven to exact revenge against Golbez following the death of his daughter Anna, Edward Chris von Miel, the Prince of Damshin, who lost his family and his beloved Anna to Golbez's attack on his kingdom. Rosa Joanne Farrell, a white mage and archer from Baron. Her feelings towards Cecil grow far beyond friendship. Young Frank Linden, the Grand Master of the Monks of Fable. Palom, a young white mage in training and his twin sister. Porum, a young black mage in training and his twin brother. Sid Paldana, a master engineer who developed various airships for the Red Wing and builder of the Enterprise. Edge Galdine, the Prince of Abel, and a skilled ninja, quick to act on his emotions but has a strong sense of justice. And Fusia, a Lunarian from the Red Moon. He sheds some light on Cecil and Golbez's true origin, and the conflict that has threatened the Blue Planet's peace. The story centers around Cecil as he breaks away from his service to the tyrannical king, and his journey to redemption as he faces the consequences of his previous actions, and eventually travels to the moon and back in hopes of stopping the sorcerer Golbez from sealing the crystals and destroying the world. 4 became the second mainline game released in the West, and was officially rebranded as Final Fantasy II. Later releases internationally would fix this, as it would be a later entry in the franchise. The game is available on Super Famicom, SNES, PlayStation, 1:1 Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Wii Virtual Console, mobile phones, PSP, PSN Network, iOS, Android, and Steam. Later in the same year as 4's release, Square released Final Fantasy IV Easy Type. The original Final Fantasy IV was considered far too hard for children, the core gaming audience at the time. To counter this, Easy Type was created with various spells and abilities and items removed or altered, shop prices lowered, many enemies, attacks, items, and a few more advanced lines of dialogue renamed and edited. It's a common misconception that the Western release of 4 is based on Japan's Easy Type due to the Western 2 being far easier than its Japanese counterpart. In actuality, Easy Type is based on the Western 2, as the localization was already finished before Easy Type was even thought about. Consequently, Easy Type is actually easier than Final Fantasy II in the West. Just like Final Fantasy Legend 1, a second entry was released in the West in 1991. Same as the first one, Legend 2 is actually Saga Hyo Detsu, or Saga 2, The Treasure Legend, released under the Final Fantasy banner. The story tells of a great tower located in the world and connects to various other worlds. All these worlds contain magi, fragments of an ancient goddess who existed several eons ago. The party sets out to gather the magi to prevent those of sinister method from collecting it and becoming the new gods. While now well known as Sword of Mana, Final Fantasy Adventure was released as a spin-off to the main FF series. While marketed as an FF game, its gameplay is actually more similar to something you would find in Legend of Zelda games. The story follows Sumo and Fuji as they attempt to thwart Dark Lord and his sorcerer assistant Julius reaching the Tree of Mana and dooming the world. Reviews for the game were generally positive, citing the strong story although shaky English translations. The game was remade for the GBA, titled Sword of Mana, with all Final Fantasy elements removed. On September 2015, Square Enix announced a 3D remake on the PS Vita and iOS, though no other information is available at this time. The 5th installment in the Final Fantasy series, this is the game in which Hironobu Sakaguchi and Yoshinori Kitase work together. Kitase has described the experience as them working on a relay, so the first thing they would do is check the data to see what the other had put up and checking for continuity. We'd see each other's work and think, I'll make something better, in a sort of competition. Hironobu Sakaguchi was in charge of overall design, while everyone else carried around their ideas in a plan book. FF5 is also the first game to involve famous character artist and game director Tatsuya Nomura. The original Super Famicom FF5 was never released in the West, with with interviews from a translator, Ted Wolseley, stating that it just wasn't accessible for the average gamer, and that while most of the game was translated, Square opted not to ship it because they didn't feel the US market were ready for a second flagship RPG after 2 or 4. The game stars a crew of 5 unique heroes with an initial 4, and 1 being replaced later on. These include Bart Klauser, an adventurer who becomes embroiled in the adventures when he comes across the crash site of a meteorite with Boku, his chocobo, and meets the rest of the party. Luna Charlotte Tycoon, the daughter of King Tycoon, who meets Bart in the meteorite crash site while searching for her father when he fails to return. Golf Helm Beldison, a mysterious old man with amnesia discovered unconscious at the meteorite crash site. He remembers only 2 things, his name and that he is going to the Wind Shrine. Ferris Schweiss, a pirate captain whom the party meet when they attempt to sneak aboard her ship, and Krill Maya Baldson, Golf's granddaughter who aids the party on several occasions. The story of FF5 begins as wandering Bart investigates a fallen meteorite, where he encounters several characters, one of whom reveals the danger facing the 4 crystals that control the world's elements. These crystals act as a seal on Exdeath, an evil sorcerer. Bart and his party must keep the crystals from being exploited by Exdeath's influence and prevent his resurgence. FF5 has become praised for the freedom of customization that the player has over the party achieved with the job system. Despite the original version only being released in Japan, it sold 2 million copies. The game has since been released on Super Famicom, PlayStation, Game Boy Advance, Wii Virtual Console, PSN Network, Android, and Steam. FF5 was so popular that it was given an OVA anime sequel, Legend of the Crystals, set 200 years after the game's events. But that is a story for another time. Wow, that was a lot of information. And we're not even halfway through the 90s. Anyway, what do you think of the video? Leave all comments down below, and don't forget to like and please subscribe. Till next time. You gotta turn out.